Forum, the CPTPP, examining the benefits and challenges during post-ratification and exploring gains with new potential partners. So those of us who are in the room, I hope, are no strangers to the CPTPP's many loops and tangles it has undergone in Malaysia. As we know, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, the TPPA, originally was a trade agreement signed including with the United States. After the US withdrew from the TPP, of course, the remaining 11 signatories, known as the TPP-11, continued talks, and this led to what we know today as the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the CPTPP. This was signed in March 2018. And for Malaysia's case, after many years, after many variations of cost-benefit analysis and more analysis, and I think even more analysis, there were at least 3 different analysis reports done by different organizations. The entry went into force finally on 29th of November 2022, which was just late last year. This is a landmark free trade agreement representing 13% of the global gross domestic product, GDP. The recent addition of the United Kingdom as the latest signatory to the CPTPP is a clear indication of the growing importance of this trade pact on the global stage. And of course, other economies have also expressed further interest in joining the trade pact, including Taiwan, the Republic of Korea, the Philippines, and the People's Republic of China, PRC. Now, IDEAS has also been no stranger to the discussion, the public discourse on the CPTPP, all the way back to the TPPA. We were already conducting our own analysis and reports, arguing for the benefits of signing such a multilateral trade agreement. I believe we were one of the few think tanks at the time that went rather public in our support for it. Now to the CPTPP, just to share as well, if you're interested, over the past years, while the Malaysian government was deciding and was undergoing negotiations, we have organized numerous roundtable discussions, written policy briefs, and released press statements to support the ratification of the CPTPP by Malaysia. For example, in 2020, IDEAS published an economic impact assessment for Malaysia, Taiwan, and the CPTPP, which involved an analysis of CPTPP provisions and trade structures between Malaysia and Taiwan, and we provided an estimation of the aggregate impact if Taiwan joins the CPTPP by employing the CGE model, the Computable General Equilibrium model. And we found that by ratifying and implementing the CPTPP, it would ultimately boost the GDP for Malaysia by an additional 1% were we to sign it, while creating an additional 140,000 job opportunities. So MITI, which I hope is represented today, our Ministry of International Trade and Industry, also produced the latest cost-benefit analysis, which sees our GDP projected to increase by $6.5 billion and investments increased by $112 billion over the period of 2021 to 2030. And they also see that Malaysia will have a continued trade surplus of $53.5 billion by 2030. So this translates into significant welfare gains for Malaysia, which is projected to increase by $15.1 billion in 2030. Now, of course, all these are figures, are statistics that are easy to cite, but the reality would be what happens on the ground. The reality would be, are the corporations who are actively contributing to Malaysia's industry aware of the various clauses that they can use? Malaysia already has so many bilateral trade agreements, so how will they understand and interpret the CPTPP to be any different from these other FTAs? The aim of this public forum, as well as our various roundtable discussions and activities, is really to raise awareness and advocate for reforms post-ratification of the CPTPP, because it's one thing to sign the document, it's another thing to actually go through the rigor of ensuring our laws and policies comply to the very, very high standards of the trade agreement. So today, I'm very glad that we have brought together some of the prime experts who will understand and unpack for us the CPTPP and what it entails for Malaysia. What does this look like in the future? Of course, many such forums will need to happen for the public to really understand it in a meaningful manner, especially those from industry. And I think one thing I'd like to also address in the room is that prior to the ratification of the CPTPP, there were groups who were, I would say, mildly opposed to the signing of it. And I think it's also important to understand the reasons for that. So hopefully with some of these challenges addressed today transparently, and what we believe the government of the day will also do to ensure that these concerns can be mitigated. So for all of these purposes, we're glad to have all of you join us today on this lovely morning. And we look forward to hearing your questions, your views about how you think the CPTPP may impact upon your specific industry, whichever industry you come from. And finally, just to say that the CPTPP not just behaves or acts as a traditional trade agreement in removing trade barriers and import levies, but this is a trade pact that will promote standardization on various policies, including environment, labor, digital economy, investment, food regulations, public procurement, state-owned enterprises, among others. This is the time that at least some of us have been waiting for, and we look forward to seeing how the government will standardize these policies, not just now, but in the years to come. So thank you for your kind participation today. I wish you all the best, and I look forward to an invigorating debate and dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Trisha, for the welcoming remarks. Moving along with our proceedings, I would like to invite our panel discussion lineup to the stage. Please welcome moderator Dr. Juwita Mohammed, Prof. Dr. Tham Siew Yen, Prof. Dr. Evelyn Devadasan, and Dr. Yen Hua Ching, who is joining us via Zoom. Professor Dr. Ong Kiam Min will be joining us shortly. Dr. Juwita, the floor is yours.
Still on mute. Okay.
One, two, two.
Very good morning, everyone. My name is Juwita Mohammed. Welcome to our public forum today. We're going to be talking about CPTPP, the benefits and the challenges that we face on the journey to reforms. Let me just set the stage. I would like to thank Trisha for also giving a bit of background to the CPTPP. It has been a grueling of more than 5 years of negotiations with more than 18 rounds of negotiations for Malaysia. And at that time with the US, and now even without the US, we see that Malaysia has ratified, and also we have entered into force as early as last year in November. Just like the CPTPP, we do have challenges here on the stage as well. What is different between TPP and CPTPP is quite significant, and maybe I can also highlight it here before we delve into the benefits and also the challenges we face in the road to reforms. With the CPTPP, about 22 different clauses were being suspended, and these included clauses related to government procurement, SOEs, and the like. What is different about the CPTPP is that it isn't like any bilateral or multilateral agreement that we've seen. The CPTPP is not your traditional trade agreement. It's not just about investment and also on trade traditional chapters. It expands into discipline chapters that we haven't seen in past free trade agreements. These discipline chapters included again, the environment chapter, the labor chapter. It also included the SOE, state-owned enterprise chapter, and also the very controversial ISDS, the investor-state dispute mechanism. So today, we're going to be exploring again the benefits of being a member of CPTPP, and also trying to examine why it is important for CPTPP to be more inclusive. We will also delve into some of the challenges we are facing when we think of reforms. When we think of reforms highlighted by the provisions in the labor chapter and in the provisions in the government procurement chapter, as well as in the state-owned enterprises chapter. So today, let me introduce you to our trade economists and trade experts. Here on the stage, we have Professor Evelyn Devadesan, professor at the Faculty of Business and Economics of University Malaya. On my left, we have Emeritus Professor Dr. Tam Swee Yen from UKM. We have also here Professor Dr. Ong Kiam Ming, Program Director at the Philosophy, Politics and Economics at Taylor's University, Malaysia. And online from Taiwan, we have Dr. Yen Huai Xing, Senior Deputy Executive Director at the Taiwan WTO and the RTA Center in Taiwan. Thank you all for being here. So I will invite all of the speakers to give a brief statement on the subject matter. So maybe I can start with Prof. Tam, 5 to 7 minutes on your opening statement.
Hi, good morning to all. First, let me thank IDEAS for the opportunity to be here. I would also like to emphasize that I am here on my own personal capacity, that whatever I say is actually my own personal opinion, does not reflect at all any of my institutional affiliations. So please take note of that. I think actually we talk about the benefits. We have in Malaysia done 3 studies, as Dr. Tricia Yeo has mentioned in her opening remarks, on what are the expected benefits from the agreement. I would like actually to highlight that these are all expected benefits, that when you run the CGE model, your partial equilibrium model, when you do your interviews, that these are what you expect to gain from the agreement. Expected cannot necessarily translate into real gains unless the firms and the businesses use the agreement to expand their businesses. So please take note of that there's no point to enumerate benefit upon benefit if firms do not utilize the agreement. So unlike, I guess, the common perception, I do not emphasize on benefits, but I emphasize on utilization. So firms must understand the agreement and must know how to use the agreement to expand their businesses, not domestically, but across shores. So a lot of the expected gains are in the export arena, being able to export more, being able to diversify your markets, and the welfare gains that Dr. Tricia Yeo spoke about in the opening remarks. The welfare gains are actually translated from being able to increase your exports. So unless existing exporters can expand their export share, and more importantly, new exporters are brought on board, the agreement will not bring any welfare gains to the country. So I just end at that.
Hi, thanks, Dr. Juwita. And firstly, I'd like to record my sincere thanks to IDS for the opportunity to share my thoughts. Coming back to your question on the benefits, I would like to think we have signed on to so many FTAs. So what are the potential benefits one can expect from CPTPP, which is quite different from our other agreements because of it's kind of an ambitious agreement, yeah? So the first thing when one signs onto an agreement, we talk about market access. But I think it's important, as Prof. Tam says, to actually distinguish between potential market access and effective market access. So when we talk about the CPTPP, we would have heard very often we have new partners where Malaysia does not have an FTA with Canada, Peru, and Mexico, right? Canada, Peru, and Mexico. That's true. And if we look at the utilization of CPTPP based on some latest figures, the number of certificate of origin for exports to these three new partners between December to July, December of last year to July, stands at 1,380, which exceeds even that with our traditional partner, which is Japan. Also exceeds with RCEP, Japan, when we use the RCEP platform. So that's quite telling that utilization of CPTPP is there. But having said that, and also we see a sudden increase for the period, if you look back 5 years in average, 2018 to 2022, exports to Mexico have increased significantly by 18.1%, yeah? And also imports, of course, Chile, we already have an FTA with. So what that tells you is that yes, CPTPP is being utilized, but one has to be cautious when we talk about market access in terms of goods, simply because the supply chain within this unusual, if I could call them, partners that are not very normal here in the context of geographical location, the supply chain is not very complete. So when we talk about CPTPP, we always talk about, oh, we need to diversify supply chain, increase supply chain resilience. Indeed, it's true, we have new partners, but we have to be careful that our major players are also not there. So overestimating market access in goods could be, we need to take that with a bit of caution. But what I would like to emphasize is services. I see CPTPP as a platform for us to engage more in services. And if you look at our Malaysia's trade, yeah, in goods, trade in goods, the CPT partners make up about, on average, again, yeah, for the last 5 years, make up about 30.1% of our global trade in goods. But in terms of services, it's about 37%. Marginally higher. And what's interesting, when we think of our major players in terms of trade in goods, the first thing that comes up would be Singapore, of course. at the forefront, followed by Japan, Vietnam, and Australia. But when we look at services, Singapore is still at the forefront, but at the distant second, nevertheless important at 15% of our total trade in services within CPTPP is UK, the United Kingdom. And this sinks in very well because the United Kingdom is a global supplier, second largest global supplier of services. So I see some potential room for engagement in services, engagement by extending already our current engagement through investment and trade. So I see in services that CPTPP offers something different, because today when you talk about supply chains, it's a bundling of services and goods, right? And of course, the more important thing is data services. And the United Kingdom is also there, the first European FTA with strict rules on digital trade. We can come back to some of these benefits. And the third one I would talk about in terms of market access. So you have goods, services, government procurement, as Dr. Juwita mentioned. Now, government procurement, the threshold, the contract thresholds in goods, services, and construction, much lower with CPTP partners such as Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and Singapore. So it's something new. We never thought about it, about government procurement market access. It's the first FTA with that. But here again, we need to be careful because we need to look at how the position of our companies, how established they are, because they're going to compete. Are they ready to compete with bidders, other bidders in these 4 countries, let's say, even though the thresholds are lower? So again, some qualification is needed when we talk about market access. Now, putting all this together, any FTA when we join, we are interested in market access. Anyway, that's why more entrants come into an agreement. Everybody doesn't want to be left out. It's more of a political thing than an economics view. We can say it's all about, oh, you have welfare gains. The bigger, the better. You run any CGE model, the bigger, the better the welfare gains increase, you get the same results. But it's a political thing because we all don't want to be left out. So to me, if I put all this together and I say what the CPTPP offer, to me, it's just a game changer for Malaysia, because we never thought about reforms like a government procurement act, a cybersecurity bill. Now, there wouldn't be a force for change if we did not have a high quality agreement as such, because we need an agreement that will push the country to reform in a way to actually align with the realities of trade. I know there's pushback against this CPTPP, but we cannot maintain the same status quo because everybody is joining the bandwagon. So it's like a domino effect. So if you ask me CPTPP, is it good or bad? I will say it's good because it's a force for change. So it gets us started on thinking of the role of institutions, because today market access is not a standalone thing. You cannot get market access if you do not have transparency. You cannot get market access if you do not have good governance. You cannot get market access if you do not show accountability. So market access is tied with intangible elements like governance, transparency, and accountability. So in that sense, CPTPP for me is different.
Testing. Thanks, Dr. Juwita. I'd like to apologize for being late, KL traffic. I just want to make 3 practical points, given my position as former Deputy Minister of MITI. A bit disappointed that CPTPP ratification wasn't pushed through when Pakatan Harapan was in government from 2018 to 2020, but glad that it was finally ratified. The 3 points I want to make is as follows. The first point is that the fears about ISDS, which are, I think, misinformed and also overblown, have not been realized. I'm not talking about just after the CPTPP has been ratified, but even during the most concerning of situations which happened during the COVID-19 lockdowns. If any of the countries that trades with Malaysia and have significant FDIs in Malaysia wanted to take the Malaysian government to court using existing FTAs as well as bilateral treaties bids, they would have done so during the COVID period. In fact, many of them were very unhappy. You may remember the German and as well as Japanese chambers of commerce that issued very strong letters about the unpredictability of the shutdowns that were being issued by the government during COVID. And during this time, there were no ISDS cases, right? So I think when this kind of situation resulted in no ISDS cases being put forth, I think the opponents against CPTPP, they've been using this. I think this is a clear lesson for them as well. And linked to that would be even intellectual property arguments to say that bilateral treaties would be used to stop the importation of medicines, for example, because of intellectual property issues. We saw that even though there were problems with deployment of the COVID-19 vaccine, again, there were no these kinds of extra legal means using bids to sort of like prevent vaccines from being distributed. So that's the first point. The second point I'd like to make is with regards to government procurement, and this is a practical issue. I sometimes go to the e-Perolehan website just to see what updates there are. And I did this just before, a conference that was organized by C4. And I'm glad to say that there has been announcements that have been made by the Ministry of Finance here in Malaysia to update some of the public procurement terms and conditions in alignment with CPTPP. I agree with what Dr. Evelyn said just now in the sense that because the thresholds are different, many of the foreign companies are probably not that interested in coming in at the kind of low thresholds. But of course, because of existing carve-outs, there are still certain requirements with regards to being registered with MOF, to be part and parcel of the supply chain. So what I think the challenge in this area is that MOF should actually be more transparent in terms of briefing the larger public, especially those who are in the government procurement ecosystem, about some of the trajectories and plans moving forward with regards to the reduction in some of these barriers over time. But because it's such a politically sensitive issue, I'm sure that if it's discussed outside these halls, apart away from people who are perhaps a bit more intellectual, definitely social media will take it and spin it out of proportion, right? So this is a challenge that I think MOF faces. The third issue I'd like to bring up is the fact that whenever we have these FTAs, to really actualize it, whether it's in terms of greater exports of goods and services, exports of goods or services, we actually need to bring Malaysian delegations to visit new markets in Mexico, in Canada, in Peru. There have been some of these delegations going abroad, but whenever, for example, a minister or deputy minister goes and visits, in this case, it's both are his, the deputy and minister of MITI, they will be able to bring about delegations to go to these places and open up new trajectories and new markets. So I think that needs to be done in a more aggressive manner, perhaps over the next couple of years. So I'll stop my points there. Thanks.
Check. Can I invite Dr. Yen to give her opening statement?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to all speakers and participants. I'm Huixin Yan from Taiwan WTO and RTS Center of CIER in Taiwan. Thank you for invitation from IDEAS. My center has been working closely with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Economic Affairs on the trade policy, including CPTPP. So it's my honor to have chance to share some views about Taiwan's perspective in enjoying the CPTPP. And as for the benefits of being a member of CPTPP for Taiwan, I think I want to highlight the main profits that for our consideration. Through CPTPP, the key benefits is to provide Taiwan's products level playing field in the exporting market. Due to the limited regional trade agreements, Taiwan's exports are subject to different level of tariff lines. Most of our exports of like steel, textile, paper products still need to pay more than 10% tariff rate in the exporting countries. That makes Taiwan's exports not in the level, I mean, the level playing field when competing with Japan, Korea, and Singapore's products. So the key benefit for Taiwan to join the CPTPP is to deal with such tariff issues. But I don't think that the benefit was only a one-side dimension. If Taiwan can join the CPTPP, that would be mutual benefits for Malaysia and also all existing CPTPP members. Particularly, I think Taiwan companies are looking for or pursuing for China Plus One strategy to move parts of our production out of China, and quite a few of locations, I mean, Taiwanese company are still trying to find a new location to invest. So I think through CPTPP, they will provide opportunity for further industrial cooperation between Taiwan and Malaysia, and of course, all the CPTPP members. So I think that will the basic benefit, I think, for Taiwan and both other CPTPP members. As for the challenges, I will also provide some observations. Taiwan has voluntarily conducted a review of a regulatory regime that is not in line with CPTPP requirements. I work on this assignment closely with the government, so I am more than certain to say to implement WTO plus or WTO extra requirements in CPTPP, such as IPR, Service Domestic Regulation, TPT, SPS, or digital trade, state-owned enterprise, and so on, would not be challenges to Taiwan. But I think the challenges for Taiwan would be the issue of further market access for imports to Taiwan, particularly in agricultural products. I can give you some general observation about Taiwan's average tariff. Taiwan's average tariff are around 50% for agricultural and 4% for manufactured products. Among them, some items like pork or beef, auto and auto parts, all require like 15 to 30% import tax rates. So it is certainly a challenge for Taiwan to reduce tariff in such sectors. So I think to remove or to reduce such tariff would bring out contentious discussions in Taiwan. It would be a challenge for our government to come up with proper policy tools that can ease farmers' anxiety, our farmers or workers' anxiety. I will just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yen. So I want to circle back to Prof. Evelyn. You mentioned just now about not just trading goods, but also trading services. And as we know with the CPTPP, as you enter into force, more than 95% of the goods would have 0% tariff rates. So that's why when you say there's more uptake of CPTPP than any other FTAs here, it's because of that tariff reduction. Let's talk about trade and services. What you mentioned was very interesting, that trade and services has also spiked up. I wanted to ask where Malaysia's strength is in trade and services. and looking at the non-tariff measures as well, where do we stand in trade and services?
I'll start with the first question on trade in services. Instead of talking more of our strengths, if I could just turn it around and say weakness, yeah? We are a technology user. We use technology quite a bit rather than invent or innovate. So I see the strengths, like if we look at UK, 15%, we export about 15% services to the UK and also import, let me get my figures right. Okay, we export about 15% and we import about 18%, okay, services among the CPTPP block. So that's as a proportion. So, and even though it's a small proportion, but UK is the second largest source for exports and imports within CPTPP. Yeah, within CPTPP. Now, if you drill down to the types of services, what comes up first is other business services. Okay, other business services constitutes about 31.7% our exports of other business services, and in the case of imports, marginally higher, but still about 30+%. Now, what does other business services constitute? It's R&D, it's professional and management consulting, and everything else that is grouped together as others. So this tells you that the CPTPP, especially through a partner like the UK, a developed country with extensive linkages through services. In fact, from their perspective, I think they release figures like 40% plus of their trade in services is with the CPTPP block vis-a-vis global. Yeah, so that tells you that this partner is an alliance that we should actually build through CPTPP, because they can offer much through R&D and so on, maybe through technical assistance and capacity building, because that's one of the chapters that we have. So I see opportunities through that way in services, because given our so-called weakness in these areas, R&D, we have not really innovated and moved up the supply chain, and services are essential in the supply chain. Your second question was on the NTMs, yeah. When we compiled NTMs for goods, unfortunately, we really couldn't compile NTMs for services, right? But if you look at NTMs from a very broader perspective, anything other than tariffs, we can think of state-owned enterprises, all that comes, state trading is an NTB, in fact, non-tariff barrier. So in services, which I'm not an expert in services, I can think of some NTBs like in the form of not really NTB per se, but I would look at it as restrictions, yeah, sort of like transparency in data. I think data is a big issue. I think IDAS has also done a study on the data policy, where access to public data has been quite minimal compared to private data. So when we want to actually move data flows, it's quite difficult, because when we talk about to have cross-border data flows, the prerequisite is domestic data flows. Data flows are important when we think of suppliers, procurement. Data is like linked to every aspect of trade, yeah. So in fact, it's moving in a way when you talk about digital trade and so on. Data is so important. So I can see restrictions in the form of transparency in data. So I wouldn't categorize it totally as an NTB per se, but it's a form of restriction, yeah, or an NTM per se.
So Julia, can I just add 2 points? On the benefits of Malaysia in terms of the service sector, not many people outside Malaysia know this, but we consistently rank in the top 5 with regards to the provision of global business centers. This would be what it was initially shared services, but has been upgraded along the way. financial services, for example, Standard Chartered has two GBCs that are operating here in KL. I had a recent meeting with some of the heads of the GBC from the US, coming from a company called Xperia. They also have a facility in Cyberjaya, Dell Computers, and Shell, and many others as well. So as we see this kind of shifting with regards to China Plus One, I do envision a lot more of these kinds of investments in the GBC area, including among companies from China, from Taiwan, from Japan, wanting to come to utilize Malaysia's location. Just to give you an example, American Airlines has a GBC here in Shah Alam, even though it does not. American Airlines doesn't fly to KL, right? So that's just one example. Very positive about this. And then in the second area, where Dr. Evelyn mentioned just now, I think we need clearer policies with regards to data localization. We do have a lot of data center investments coming into the country. We need better policy alignment, not just on the renewable energy side of things, but also from the flow of data across borders. And with the flow of and investments in these kinds of data centers, I think the current restrictions with regards to data localization, especially with regards to financial services, those would have to be slowly but surely liberalized. And maybe just one last plug. Dr. Evelyn mentioned about the lack of transparency and the breadth of data in Malaysia. Just a little bit of a plug. There's a website called data.gov.my, and I was made to understand that this is a project under Mampu. I was made to understand that this website will be revamped in the very near future. The opening, I think, will be done by the Prime Minister in this month. So when that happens, you'll be able to see a lot more data transparency in the Malaysian context, and I hope that this can continue. This is an initiative under a recently announced entity called GovTech, GovTech Malaysia, and I look forward to a lot more interesting projects that will be run by this agency, soon to be formed agency.
On the case of trade in services, actually we are traditionally a net service importer, that we have a perennial deficit in our services for as long as I can remember. So part of the reason why we are a net service importer is because we are not so competitive in our services. So we import more services than we export. That's one of the reasons. The second reason is actually, if we look at services liberalization, we have moved from the positive list to the negative list. So technically, all the services are open except the exclusions in the annexes. So when you look at the exclusion in the annexes, it's actually all the regulations. So what is the biggest barrier for services is actually the domestic regulations, because the whole of services sector is controlled by regulations. And these domestic regulations, when you talk about NTMs in services, restrict not just foreign service providers, but also domestic service providers. So therefore, a review of these regulations is actually very important if we want to move forward. For example, in private higher education, the restriction is the Private Higher Education Act, and that act applies for domestic and foreign service providers as well. So the review in regulations will help to reduce the regulatory barriers. And the other thing that controls services is actually licensing. So the whole of service sector is governed by a licensing system. You need a license to operate a bank. You need a license to operate a university. You need a license to do many things. So whether the licensing itself is cumbersome or the process of obtaining a licensing is very cumbersome, it can be a barrier in that sense in terms of the movement of services. Then the third thing is that if we look at mode 3 in services, when foreign direct investment comes into the service sector, when you have a foreign service provider operating in the country, it doesn't necessarily translate into an export of services. For example, a foreign investor invests in logistics and warehousing. So the logistics and warehousing translates into movement of goods. So it facilitates the movement of goods. It does not necessarily translate into an export of a service. So because of the nature of services, a lot of these services can actually help to facilitate movement of goods, even when there's no export of services that is involved. So services is a bit complex because of the 4 modes of delivery that you have to look carefully, and then because of its links with goods, that it is used to support the movement of goods, not just the movement of services alone. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so glad that the speakers brought up trade and services, because looking at the cost and benefit analysis that was published earlier last year, our strength is definitely not in trade and services. It's more in trade and goods, E&E, agriculture, and also textile, possibly, but not trade and services. So it's good to explore those weaknesses as well. Prof. Tam, you mentioned just now in your opening statement that there are benefits, there are welfare gains, but let's talk about challenges. Can you unbundle it a bit more? You already mentioned about the NTMs in the services sector, and these are all domestic regulatory barriers. What are the other challenges that you see? We have ratified, again, we have entered into force, but for several chapters, we do still have about 2 to 3 years to implement and socialize those reforms on the ground. So maybe I can get a bit of your take on what are the other challenges in the short term to medium term that you see when we do our reforms on the ground.
Okay, I would like to refer to a study that was done by CSIS, the only study that I think that has actually looked at what do CPTPP member country businesses think about the CPTPP. So it was a survey that was conducted of 530 firms in Australia, Mexico, Singapore, and Vietnam before Malaysia ratified. So Malaysia was not included, even though it was a cross-country study. So they found several important findings from the survey of the businesses of their experience in using the CPTPP, which I think you will also see if you use it on Malaysia. One is that the expansion in exports is actually on existing exporters. So existing exporters who understand the export game, who know how to export already, are able to use the agreements, which implies these are usually the larger firms or the multinationals, not the smaller firms. So smaller firms are actually not able to use it for export. That means they are not able to bring new exporters into the agreement. However, they are able to benefit from better access to foreign supplies and investment, which means that they are able to source their inputs from other countries in the trade pact. Which also means that they are able to diversify their imports, change their imports from local suppliers to foreign suppliers. So there's the competition element that our domestic firms will have to face. But I think the most important thing is actually what they found is that they actually want to ensure that the agreement is implemented and enforced. So that means that the firms find that not necessarily all countries are able to implement or monitor or enforce the reforms that are needed, including, for example, we're not talking about outstanding reforms, but the reforms that have already been made, the changes in the legislations that have already been made. For example, we have made changes in our labor laws. This is ex-ante reforms that we made before we could ratify. But who monitors the implementation and enforcement? Are we able to monitor? And so this is referring to that. And the last finding they found is actually, although there's an expansion in market opportunities, firms actually want more information about foreign customers, market opportunities, and e-commerce capabilities. So the agreement brings with it a lot of opportunities, but it doesn't change the fact that you've got to know how to export first before you can get onto the export platform. So being able to tap on all the opportunities that the CPTPP has for the local firms means that you also need complementary policy actions in terms of being able to do business matchmaking for them. For example, take them, as what Dr. Ong has said, on these trade missions to the new partner countries so that they can find a partner over there, trading partner to work with them. So the trade missions, being able to get firms to engage with new markets or with existing markets and bring new firms on board is very important. And these can be very challenging for small firms.
Yeah, just to add on to that, there's a chapter on SMEs in the CPTPP. And one of the things that this chapter is supposed to do is come up with some sort of a database to be able to assist SMEs to benefit from integrating into the CPTPP. I think because of COVID and also because of different priorities, that has been sort of like shifted over the couple of years since CPTPP was put in force. This chapter has never really been discussed, as far as I know, in the different communiques and the different statements that have been issued out of the different CPTPP meetings, which is very consistent with what Prof. Tam has said just now. The SMEs actually are not really benefiting that much. So this is one area where I think different governments and even the private sector associations such as the SME Association, they can actually do much more in terms of raising awareness on CPTPP benefits, as well as you can throw in RCEP as well. So I think even for Dr. Yen's organization in Taiwan, I think if let's say as one of the pitches for Taiwan to enter into CPTPP, to be able to showcase that Taiwan's vibrant SME ecosystem can also play a part in terms of helping other SMEs in other CPTPP countries increase their trade in goods and services to Taiwan, and also in the larger CPTPP ecosystem. That I think will be a strong push for why Taiwan should be allowed to be considered to enter into CPTPP.
Thank you, Prof. I think you read my mind, but I have a short question and a long question for you. Coming back to Prof. Tam's question on who monitors the implementation of all of the legislations on the ground. That's number one. Is it MITI? Is it someone else? Is it another agency? But the other thing is, again, on reforms. What types of reforms do we need so that not just SME players can also get the benefit from CPTPP, but what are the other reforms that Malaysia needs to prioritize right now in the short term?
Okay, so two responses. One is the domestic response, which is I think MITI needs to be very transparent with regards to its own scorecard on the CPTPP achievements. So this should be something that I hope can be published on a yearly basis. To say that these are the areas within the CPTPP agreement where Malaysia has made certain progress, including on labour issues and environmental issues, and on other areas as well. That's one. So that MITI can be transparent with the larger public, including its critics, the critics of CPTPP. And I think MITI hasn't really done enough on this front, which would probably be one of the more valid criticisms against MITI. It's still early days yet, since we just ratified it, and entered into force last year. That's one. The second thing is the international dimension. I've written about this in the past, in the press statement, to say that we should actually push for Malaysia to be the host, the secretariat for CPTPP. Why not? Why should, for example, our neighbors down south get always get all the secretariat positions, right? So this will also show Malaysia's own commitment to free trade, to say that Malaysia is willing to stick its neck out and to say that we are willing to be the secretariat for the CPTPP, and by showing our own monitoring progress, we'll be able to say that this is how we will be able to do similar actions to monitor and help check the progress of CPTPP among all other countries as well. Right now, it's on a rotating basis, and I don't think that's very effective.
Yes, right now the chair of CPTPP is New Zealand, and the year before it was Singapore, so it will be on a rotational basis. Let me go to Dr. Yen. We've been talking about, challenges for Malaysia, but I would like to ask your experience from the Taiwanese experience as well. Why do you think, again, it is important for CPTPP to be more inclusive? Maybe I can get Dr. Yen's take on that. Thank you. Did we lose Dr. Yen online? Apparently there's some technical difficulty with the connection, so I will jump back to Professor Evelyn. Again, we talked about the benefits, we talked about the challenges, but I think it is important for us to look at the short-term adjustment costs of us being in CPTPP. Can you elaborate a bit about the short-term adjustment costs that we need to be bracing for?
I like to look at adjustment costs from the perspective of businesses. We have heard and we've been to many seminars. We talk about SMEs and their compliance with ESG. That involves costs, from the perspective of SMEs. Sometimes not only SMEs per se, but also the MNCs, because today when we talk about trade and environment, we need to think about the carbon content of our products as we head towards decarbonization. So what are the methods in place to calculate the carbon content, for example? So I see a lot of adjustments to be made within companies that could be costly. It may not be just short-term, it may be mid to long-term adjustments that the companies would have to have a proper ESG, not just an ESG agenda, but also to move towards methods that are needed to actually calculate the carbon content. For example, to move towards hard policy issues, such as to have carbon pricing as that of other countries. That would be from the firm level perspective, But from vulnerable groups, one thing that actually, which I read in the media, because when you talk about NTMs, we also talk about new plant varieties. And I saw the pushback from the farmers regarding this, I can't get IPVOV, It's called International Plant Variety Convention. And their concern was a lot of our farmers use previous harvests, the seeds from previous harvests for storage. Probably somebody from the agriculture sector would be able to chip in, would be more in the know. Now, they were concerned that because will they be able to continue with these traditional practices? So that's a very micro kind of concern that they're having in terms of informal seed sharing and storing. Because you have to be a party to this IPOV 91. But then the case in point is always like when you look at Vietnam, there are some statistics to say that Vietnam improved its sustainability of food systems by having new plant varieties, and the income of the Vietnamese farmers increased by 24% since 2006. So the idea of these small concerns, there could be some adjustments in the short run because they may have to change their practices. But in the long term, you see income gains. And if Vietnam can do it, why not Malaysia? Dr. Juwita, if I could come back on the earlier thing about data. To me, I feel that the government will have a lot of adjustments because you need to upgrade the reforms very broadly at the macro level. And if I like to talk about this data a bit, my concern is that with these new chapters, trade, labor, trade environment, we talk about the resilience of supply chains, the kind of analysis that we are doing to inform the public through cost-benefit analysis, not downplaying, those are extensive studies because we want some figures. How much do they actually depict reality or rather abstract from reality because of their assumptions? So I would like to say that the government would face costs, I would say enforcement costs or even inefficiency, if they were to actually build on studies like this without going into firm level kind of studies, because it's the firms that trade, it's not the countries. And I was just reading a report from down south, unfortunately, from Singapore, Prof. I was so intrigued. Yeah, they're talking about, we're not even talking about aggregate level data to guide robust trade policy analysis. They are talking about, I can't get this, corporate health index. They've actually used predictive machine learning to monitor corporate health index. Now, isn't that so necessary? Let's say we talk about food, the food sector and food security. Isn't it necessary to look at the stresses the SMEs face against the corporate sector? And with this CHI index, they're able to zoom in to certain firms, calculate the corporate health index, aggregate it to a sectoral level, and identify where the stresses are. And they've identified food and beverages and wholesale. Now, that is so lacking to me in Malaysia when we depend on such aggregated data. Our policy formulation tends to be weak because of such data. And we give wrong signals. At the same time, we raise unnecessary concerns. And we cannot have specific targeted policies. So to me, the heart of all this in trade is data flows. In policy making, it is data. Otherwise, the government is going to have huge adjustment costs. They may have all these reforms, like Prof. Tam said, labor reforms. But how do you know exactly how it would impact specific sectors or specific key players without such information? So I think information is lacking because of lack of fine granular data at the firm level. And even if we have it, how accessible is this data to everyone, to the public, to the researchers, to the think tank? Being a researcher myself, we are just grappling with aggregate data, trying to use sophisticated models like CGE, and yet it's not sophisticated when we have predictive machine learning and AI and all this coming into play. So trade policy formulation has to start first. That's very fundamental. Robust trade policy formulation based on firm level granular data to identify specific sectors. Yeah, to me, that's the key point to actually move any reform and to minimize adjustments, like you would say. Otherwise, you will reform policies based on lack of information and face more adjustment costs, if I would call it implementation costs or enforcement costs when it comes to actually implementing such policies.
I strongly agree with Professor Evelyn on this matter, that I think the whole problem with policy and policy making in Malaysia is that we do not have good data at the firm level. And even when we have data at the firm level, it is never made accessible for researchers. So Prof. Evelyn and I, when we go on, say the conference circuit and we meet our fellow researchers from Indonesia, from Thailand, from Vietnam, from Cambodia, we see that they are able to do a lot more robust studies because they have access to firm level data. So the firm level data is very critical. Unless we rectify this, unless we are able to get the response from the targeted audience, which are the firms, it is very difficult for us to look at trade data and say this is where we are. Because the trade that occurs at the aggregate level occurs because of several simultaneous factors, you know. It's not just trade policy alone. If your trade data jump, it could be because we are going through a good year, nothing to do with your policy. So if your investment data jumps, it's because global FDI is recovering, may not be related to your trade policies or your agreement. So we have to be able to disaggregate data down to the firm level and get the firm level response. That is why I actually support doing surveys, except that doing survey in Malaysia is exceedingly hard. Firms are also not willing to respond to surveys. So if we want to have better policies, firms must cooperate in terms of being willing to respond to surveys, and government has to collect better data at the firm level and make it open for researchers. Thank you.
I'm glad this was brought up. I was informed that for CPTPP, the minimum requirement for most trade negotiators would be the CGE model, but the CGE model itself would not be enough. There would still need to be qualitative analysis as well as sectoral and also firm level analysis to contribute to those findings, and also to maybe pull, cover the holes of what the CGE analysis has. So I think I agree with all of you. So back to Dr. Yen. Dr. Yen, in your opinion, why is it important for CPTPP, again, a very high standard multilateral trade agreement, why is it important for CPTPP to be more inclusive?
Okay, I think to having more players in this block, the main benefit will be like power in numbers. That is, it makes CPTPP ecosystem more sustainable and complete. And I think that I can elaborate in 2 points. I think if we can have more players in this block CPTPP, it will bring the world-class supply chain suppliers. More players could participate in the block. It certainly will bring their champions of industry, like Taiwan. We have a lot of champions in our ICT industries, and also other like traditional sectors. And the second, I think probably some of you have mentioned that I think more people coming, more countries coming in these regional trade activities that will provide alternative sources of supply to increase economic resilience. CPTPP aims to strengthening trade and investment relations among members through these reducing tariff and non-tariff barriers. It certainly would offer all consumer and industrial more choice to buy, more choice to produce, and I think bringing more countries coming to this block, that will limit the gap of some intermediate inputs or products that we still rely on. I mean, the CPTPP members still relied on such products coming from non-CPTPP members. This would make CPTPP more attractive to new applicants. And I also think to make CPTPP more inclusive, is another way to respond to the international, the emerging or these changing international economic orders. The global economic orders is rapidly changing today, and tensions between G2 has been kept elevating. I think there are some key factors that should be, considered for this new era, mainly about the approach to ensure the leadership in key areas and to ensure our own, the CPTPP members' economic autonomy, and also to have more coordination with close trading partners. I think that is another point that I want to highlight. And also, I think, as I mentioned, that CPTPP, if Taiwan can join CPTPP, it is a mutual benefit for Malaysia and also all the CPTPP members. I think I would like to highlight a couple of dimensions. First of all, I think we all like-minded partners. So I think it is strategically thinking that Malaysia, Singapore, and all Taiwan are recognized as friendshoring for the Western. So we should be in the same team to work together in this supply chain reconfiguration. And the second consideration is, I think, Taiwan company, as I mentioned earlier, Taiwan company are moving out of their production line from China and pursuing China Plus One policy. The question is, who will be the plus one for Taiwanese company? And we have done some survey that it shows that Taiwan's company's choice of location, it appears that Malaysia is chosen as semiconductor products for Taiwanese company. The new location to invest. But India, Vietnam are preferred for smartphone production. And Thailand, Indonesia are located by Taiwanese company as auto, internet, and internet appliance and manufacturer. So that means, but I think there are more Taiwanese company planning to diversify their productions from China. So I think Malaysia may play a bigger role in this as a new location for Taiwanese business. And so I think that is another thinking that why we urge that CPTPP can include more new members to join this bloc. And through CPTPP, I think it will create more predictable trading regime or a relationship between Taiwan and the CPTPP countries. And as I say, our business may have greater confidence to stay and to help shape and maintain industry clusters for mutual benefit. So I think all CPTPP members, including Malaysia, are ideals to serve as the foundation for new partners and manufacturing locations. So I think that's basically my comment on these questions.
Thank you, Dr. Yen. I'm going to jump back to Prof. Ong Kiam Ming. We talked about what types of reforms needed. So I'm just going to ask you another difficult question. How do we implement those reforms on the ground?
I think it's got to be separated out into different areas of priority for the Ministry of International Investment, Trade and Industry, MITI. It can be based on some of the chapters that we've discussed, whether it's got to do with compliance on data or SMEs, but this will be on government procurement. but this will be a conversation that I hope can take place, among the higher management in MITI, and then to see how that can then be translated into some sort of a public communication document. Because I think if, let's say, we do not have this kind of public communication on the priorities of not just CPTPP, but the priorities of MITI in terms of being able to engage on other FTAs as well, and also to be able to do some sort of stock take on the benefits of previous FTAs, and also some of the challenges with regards to making sure that these benefits are felt by all, including the SMEs. It will be very difficult for Malaysia to do things like pitching for the secretariat for the CPTPP, or even wanting to expand to new FTAs, including something which I think the Europeans have been pushing for quite some time, which is the EU-Malaysia FTA. So the EU-Malaysia FTA I don't really see it happening anytime soon, but the EU has already looked at Thailand as a negotiating partner, Philippines as a negotiating partner. So if, let's say, Malaysia doesn't step up, again, we'll be sort of like at the losing end in terms of seeing some of our regional competitors and friends, getting ahead of us in that larger discussion. Of course, I realize that the politics in this country can be quite challenging, because anything and everything can be politicized now these days. But given the fact that this unity government has a runway of another 4 years, I do believe that with a confident policy outlook, much more can be done, and hopefully if implemented well, the people on the ground, especially at the SMEs, will be able to feel more of the benefit, towards the later part of this 4 years.
I actually wanted to add on the possibility of investment. That one of the arguments why you want to have higher standards in the free trade agreement is that these standards improve governance and the investment climate of a country, and therefore makes the partner of the agreement to be more attractive for hosting investment. So therefore, in principle, all free trade agreements should actually raise investment, be it from the partner countries or from other countries. As mentioned, that we can become the plus partners of countries that wish to relocate their investments. The problem is actually, and I think maybe it can be implemented, if Dr. Ong thinks so, that I wonder if actually MIDA can actually track when they approve investments and the investors' motivation for coming into the country, whether they can actually track it to whether it's the free trade agreement that helps them or brings Malaysia into their radar. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. Tam. So here on this stage, we're talking about how to implement those reforms, but I also understand Taiwan is very much proactive in its reform so that it's in line with all of the provisions of the CPTPP. So Dr. Yen, maybe we can pick your brain. How has Taiwan, how have, like, on best practices, what has Taiwan done to prepare itself in terms of legislation reforms, regulatory reforms? We might look at best practices as well from neighboring countries, as well as other CPTPP and potential CPTPP members. So just wanted to get your take on that.
Okay, thank you. About Taiwan's proactive, preparation for CPTPP, as I mentioned, that Taiwan has do unilateral review and preparation works, and we divide this work assignment into 3 parts. The first part is regulatory reforms by ourselves, that we start taking all the CPTPP regulations that we understand there are 30 chapters of CPTPP, and we divide this. We start taking all the requirements in these CPTPP chapters to to make sure that most of our regulatory that can comply with CPTPP. And I think, of course, there might be some challenges for SOE, state-owned enterprises, because we don't have, although Taiwan has limited experience in regional economic integration, but we have advanced FTA with Singapore and New Zealand that include or cover all the GPA, the government procurement chapter, and also digital trade, and also SPS and TPT, those kind of chapter with higher standard requirement. But state-owned enterprise, the issue to include state-owned enterprise also the first time for Taiwan. So we have done some review, and I think most of the requirement we can fulfill the requirements. And the second part is the liberalization in service and investment. For that part, because Taiwan is a latecomer in WTO, that means we already make a substantial market access, or we have made substantial commitment in the liberalization in trade and in service. So after we make some review, we think that also not a problem for Taiwan's participation to make a more ambitious commitment in CPTPP in terms of service trade and investment. So probably the only concern may be we need to discuss some potential national security implications between Taiwan and some new applicants to CPTPP, if there is any special concern for this bilateral trade relationship. And for the third part of the, unilateral review is about the reduction in tariffs. And at that part, as I mentioned also earlier, that we do have some high tariff in certain sectors, particularly for those agricultural and some particularly manufactured products like auto and auto parts. But the preparation work for our government, the strategy for this part of preparation, we consider that it will be the work that when we really kick off the negotiation with the CPTPP members, then we will deal with these tariff issues domestically. But I think before that, our government has our authority in charge of this agriculture and manufacture has privately or internally to consult with our relevant association, industry association, to make them to get better understanding about this potential for liberalization in sectors. So that's basically what we have done for our preparation. But I also want to share with you that we also finished some regulatory reform voluntarily, just for to finish, for the satisfying the requirement of CPTPP. I would like to provide some example that we have voluntarily amended some law involved in fishery, pharmaceutical, copyrights and trademark, etc. And most of them have already put in implementation since 2018. And additionally, as you may know, that Taiwan is having the negotiation with the United States, and parts of the regulatory topics are quite similar to CPTPP. The 21st Trade Initiative between Taiwan and the United States, parts of the issues are quite similar to CPTPP. and such as, regulatory coherence and also anti-corruption. And also we were going to finish the state-owned enterprise with the United States in next stage. So I mean, that means that because as you all mentioned that the United States was the original initiator of TPP. So I think the fact that we can agree with the the United States, in such issues that's similar to CPTPP, that also mean that we can conform with the CPTPP requirements. So I will just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yen, for highlighting that out. In the past, South Korea has also signed on a free trade agreement with the US. And within that free trade agreement, there is a labor chapter as well. So this is very much in line with the TPP and also the CPTPP discipline chapters. So we do find that those who have already existing free trade agreements with the US would have those implementation done on the ground already. So we've been talking on the stage for more than an hour, and we would like to open the floor for questions